Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start, I want you to think about the most boring machine you've ever walked past. A truck scale. A flat steel deck in the mud outside a grain elevator, with a little concrete shed beside it and a printer that spits out a ticket nobody reads twice. That machine has one job in the world, and it is the only job in the world that cannot be argued with. It doesn't care what you say the load is. It doesn't care who your family is. You drive on, and it tells the truth, and then it shuts up about it. Today's story is about a man who fixes those machines for a living, and about the morning a school bus driver refused to open the door at his mother-in-law's house. It's about a 5-word sentence a grandmother said to a child on a cold October morning while a dashcam was running. And it's about what happens when a man who has spent 20 years proving that things weigh what they're supposed to weigh finally turns that same patience on his own family. I'll be honest with you. This one got under my skin. There's a version of this story that's just betrayal, and that version is bad enough. But underneath it, there's something colder, and it's hidden in the most ordinary place imaginable, a floor. Stay with me to the end, because the way this man finally proves it is the single most satisfying use of arithmetic I have ever come across. Let's get into it. Delmar Ludden had a rule about mornings, and the rule was that nothing important should happen in them. Mornings were for the small, ordered things. Coffee at 4:40, the truck warming in the drive while frost let go of the windshield in slow gray sheets. The tool chest in the bed of the pickup, opened and checked by hand even though nothing in it had moved since the night before. The certified test weights in their padded rack, the crimping pliers, the spool of soft lead seal wire, the calibration log with his father's handwriting still in the first 40 pages, and his own handwriting in the rest. Delmar was 41 years old, and he was a licensed weights and measures technician for the state of Iowa, which meant that 4 days a week he drove to a grain elevator, or a landfill, or a livestock yard, or a gravel pit, somewhere across 3 counties, and he made a machine tell the truth. It is a job most people don't know exists. When a farmer hauls 60,000 pounds of corn onto a scale deck, and the ticket says 60,000 pounds, somebody at some point stood in the cold with a rack of certified iron and proved that the number wasn't a wish. That somebody, in Tallis County, was Delmar. He was good at it in the specific way that quiet men are good at things. He was not fast. He was not loud. He wrote everything down. He had a habit that annoyed every yard manager who ever met him, which was that before he tested a scale, he would stand on the empty deck for a full minute with his hands in his pockets, looking at the zero, and he would not begin until the number stopped moving. "Zero it empty," his father used to say, in the shed behind the house on Ordway Road, with his glasses pushed up and a lead seal pinched between the pliers. Then weigh. Everybody wants to weigh first. That's how you get lied to. Merle Ludden had been dead 9 years. His son still said the words out loud sometimes, in an empty scale house, at 5 in the morning, to nobody. Delmar lived 4 miles outside a town called Yarrow Bend, in a farmhouse he had rewired himself, with a wife named Marlies and a 7-year-old boy named Cal. Cal was the kind of child who put his shoes on the wrong feet and refused to be corrected because he said they felt better that way. He had a red winter coat with a strip of silver reflective tape stitched across the shoulders, which Delmar had sewn on himself the first week of kindergarten because the bus stop was on a county road with no lights, and there were mornings when the fog came off the creek so thick you couldn't see a mailbox at 30 feet. Marlies worked 3 days a week at the county extension office and 2 days doing books for her brother's company. She had been beautiful at 28, and she was still beautiful at 38 in a harder, tighter way, like something that had been sanded. She and Delmar had been married 11 years. They had been happy for maybe 7 of them. There had been a bad stretch in the middle, a year when she had gone to stay at her mother's place out on Cutbank Road, and Delmar had learned to cook for one and had not called anybody about it, not even his sister, because his instinct in a crisis was always the same. Stop moving. Watch the number. Wait for it to settle. She had come back in December of that year. She had cried in the kitchen, and he had held her, and neither of them had ever really opened that door again. Cal was born 14 months later. Delmar had decided, in the way men decide things, that the past was a closed ticket. You do not reweigh a load that already left the yard. That was the mistake. He would think about it later, standing in a machine shed with a flashlight, and he would understand that it was the only real mistake he ever made. The Wenzels were his wife's people, and they were everywhere in Tallis County. the way some families are. Bernice Wenzel was the mother, 66 years old, silver-haired, church every Sunday, a face like a closed drawer. She lived at the end of Cutbank Road, in a white two-story, with a machine shed out back, and a windbreak of blue spruce her late husband had planted in 1988. Marv Wenzel was the brother, 44, thick through the shoulders, owner of a company called Wenzel Care Transport that ran 4 wheelchair vans hauling elderly people to dialysis and kids to specialist appointments in Waterloo and Iowa City. There was a sister, Verla, who did bookkeeping and notary work out of a converted porch. There had been another sister once, Renee, who had died in a car on the ice in 2016 and whose photograph still sat on Bernice's piano, with a dried palm frond behind the frame. Cal loved his grandmother's house because there was a pond and a dog, and because Bernice made him grilled cheese cut into 4 triangles. 2 mornings a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, Cal rode Bus 41 home to Cutbank Road instead of to the farm, because Marley's worked late those days, and Delmar was often 2 counties over with his arms in a pit under a scale deck. This arrangement had existed for 2 years. It was, Delmar thought, one of the few things in his life that ran without any maintenance at all. On the second Tuesday of a cold October, at 4 in the afternoon, his phone rang while he was sealing a hopper scale at the co-op in Kettleman. It was the school. Cal was fine, the secretary said. Cal was in the office eating a granola bar. But Cal had not been dropped at his grandmother's, and the bus was back at the barn, and the driver had refused to make the stop. Delmar drove into town with his hands loose on the wheel, which is how he handled everything. He was not angry yet. Anger, in his experience, was a kind of pre-loading. You put weight on the deck before you zeroed, and then every number after that was wrong. The bus barn sat on the north edge of Yarrow Bend, behind a chain-link fence. 11 yellow buses nosed in against a row of block sheds. Bus 41 was the 4th from the end. A man was walking around it with a clipboard doing his post-trip, checking the flashers, looking under the seats for a sleeping kid, the way you're supposed to, and the way almost nobody does after 15 years. He was maybe 60, gray under a green ball cap, reading glasses on a cord, an old Carhartt with the cuffs worn through. He looked up when Delmar came through the gate, and he did not look surprised. And later Delmar would understand that this was because the man had been waiting for him for a year. "You're Cal's dad," he said. "Delmar Ludden, Waylon Frisk." He didn't offer a hand. He put the clipboard on the bumper, and he took his glasses off and cleaned them on his shirt, which is what a man does when he's about to say something he's rehearsed. "Your boy's fine. He's a good kid. He sits behind me and he tells me about bugs. They said you wouldn't make the stop. That's right. It's an approved stop. It's on the sheet. It's on the sheet," Waylon agreed. "Then I'd like to know why my son sat in a school office for an hour." The driver put his glasses back on. Out past the fence, the sun was going down behind the elevator, and the whole yard had gone the color of weak tea. He looked at Delmar for a long moment with an expression that was not hostile at all. It was something worse. It was pity, carefully rationed, the way you'd hand out water. "Sir," Waylon Frisk said, "I've driven this route 15 years. I've dropped kids at 400 houses in this county. I don't stop at that house anymore." "Why? Ask your wife." Delmar felt something go very still in his chest, the way it does when a number you've been watching stops moving, and it isn't the number you expected. "That's not an answer." "No, it isn't." Waylon picked up the clipboard, tucked it under his arm, and then said the thing that would sit in Delmar's skull for the rest of his life, in the flat, unhurried voice of a man who has decided to spend something he's been saving. "Ask your wife why. And if she tells you she doesn't know, if she says those exact words, that she doesn't know, you come back here and find me. I've got a dash cam. I keep the cards. I'll show you the 3rd of October. "October 3rd, Delmar repeated. "Last year." The driver's jaw moved once. "Bring somebody with you if you want, but don't bring her." Delmar drove home the long way, out past the co-op and the water tower, with his son asleep in the back seat and his hands loose on the wheel. And for the first time in 9 years, he heard his father's voice with a different meaning in it. "Everybody wants to weigh first. That's how you get lied to." He did not ask her that night. That was not restraint, exactly, and it was not cowardice. It was procedure. A man in his trade learns that the moment you tell somebody you're coming to test their scale, The scale gets clean. Sweep the pit, grease the levers. Somebody finds the shim that fell out in June and quietly puts it back. If you want to know what a machine actually does, you have to observe it while it thinks nobody's watching. So he made supper. He listened to Cal explain that a millipede is not a bug but an arthropod, which he pronounced with enormous care. He watched Marlies come in at 6:30 and set her keys in the bowl and pour a glass of wine and check her phone twice before she took her coat off, and he cataloged it the way he'd catalog anything. The phone came out of her bag before the coat came off her shoulders. That was new. He couldn't have said when it started, only that at some point in the last 2 or 3 years the phone had become the first thing and everybody else in the house had become the second thing. He waited until Cal was asleep. Then he stood in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in his hands, which is a stupid thing to be holding when your life ends. And he said, "The bus wouldn't drop Cal at your mother's today." Marlies did not move for 1 full second. That was the first thing. He was a man who counted. He counted it. 1 full second, with her back to him and her hand on the cabinet door. Then she turned around and said, "What?" in a bright, confused voice, and the brightness was a quarter tone too high, like a bell with a crack in it. The driver refused the stop. Cal sat in the office an hour. They called me. That's ridiculous. Who was it? Was it that old man? The one with the glasses? She laughed. It was a good laugh. It was a really good laugh. And Delmar felt the floor of his life tilt slightly, because he suddenly understood that he had heard that laugh many times and had never once asked himself what it cost her to produce. Del, he's got a thing about my mother. He's had a thing since the driveway. He backed into the culvert 2 years ago, and Mom made him pay for it, and he's been sour ever since. Culvert, Delmar said. The end of the drive. It's washed out. He clipped it. He said to ask you why. Why what? Why he's a bitter old man. Delmar folded the dish towel in half, and then in half again, and set it on the counter, square to the edge, because his hands wanted a job. He said if you told me you didn't know, he said, I should come back, and he'd show me his dashcam from October 3rd. And there it was. He had spent his whole adult life watching indicators. He knew what a load cell does in the instant a truck rolls onto a deck. The number leaps past the real weight, overshoots, hunts, and settles. People are the same. Ask a person a question they haven't prepared for, and the truth overshoots across their face before the story catches up and pulls it down. It takes about 1/3 of a second. Most people never see it, because most people are busy deciding what they'll say next. Delmar saw it. He saw his wife's face go somewhere and come back. Then Marlies Ludden looked her husband in the eye and said, I don't know what he's talking about. She said it kindly. She said it with a small, tired smile, and she reached out and touched his arm on her way to the sink, and she said, Honey, I don't know. I really don't. Those exact words. Delmar heard himself say something normal. He heard himself say that it was probably nothing, that he'd call the transportation office in the morning, that he was tired. He heard his own voice do all of that from about 2 feet outside his body. She went up at 10. He stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, with his hand flat on the cold counter, and then he went out to the shed and turned the light on and sat on the stool at his father's bench and did not touch a single tool for 40 minutes. At 11:40, he got out the calibration log for 2025 and turned back to October. He kept every day of his working life in those books, because the state required it, and because his father would have. October 3rd of the previous year, he'd been at the landfill in Tallis County, running a semi-annual on the inbound scale. He'd started at 7, finished at 11:20, and gone on to a gravel pit near Deming Corner. He had a note in the margin in his own hand. Dep, 240 light, at 40K, AJ. The scale had been reading 240 pounds light at 40,000, and he had adjusted it. Then he wrote a new line under it, on a blank page, the first non-work entry that book had ever contained. Octor 3, ask. The next morning he dropped Cal at school himself, and then drove to the bus barn at 6:15, when the drivers were doing their pre-trips in the dark, with their engines running, and the whole lot smelling like diesel and cold. Waylon Frisk was under the hood of 41 with a flashlight in his teeth. Delmar stood at the fender until the man looked up. She said she doesn't know, Delmar said. Waylon Frisk took the flashlight out of his mouth. He looked at Delmar for a while. And then he looked past him at the row of buses. And then he did something strange. He reached up and pulled the hood down, gently, with both hands, the way you'd close a door on a sleeping person. "Okay," he said, "get in." The inside of bus 41 at 6:20 in the morning was warm, and it smelled like vinyl and pencil shavings. Waylon sat in the driver's seat, and Delmar sat sideways in the first bench, with his knees in the aisle, and the driver reached up and took down a cheap dashcam that was clamped to the mirror stem with a hose clamp and electrical tape. "District put cameras in the buses in 19, he said. "Interior only, up over my shoulder. Footage goes to a server and it's gone in 30 days unless somebody pulls it." He turned the little camera over in his hands. "This one's mine. Bought it at a truck stop in 2016 after a man in a Buick ran my stop arm with 14 kids on my bus and then told the deputy I never had my lights on. Faced forward, records the road, records the door, records me. Picks up sound about 10 feet out the open door on a still morning. You keep the cards. I keep the cards." He almost smiled. "Coffee can in my shop. My wife says it's a sickness. Every card's got a piece of masking tape with the month on it. 15 years. The smile went. "You want to know why I don't stop at that house? I'm going to show you, and then I'm going to tell you what happened to me for showing somebody the first time. And then you're going to make a decision, and I'd like you to make it slow." He plugged the camera into a battery pack, and the little screen lit up, and he thumbed back through folders with a thumbnail that had a permanent crack in it. "October 3rd, he said. "Last fall, 7:41 in the morning. It was 36 degrees, and there was fog off the creek." He handed it over. The screen was 3 inches wide. Delmar watched the road come up out of gray. He watched the yellow reflection of the bus lights bounce off the fog. He heard the air brakes and the ratchet of the door, and he saw, standing at the end of a gravel drive by a washed-out culvert, his mother-in-law Bernice Wenzel in a quilted coat, with one hand on the shoulder of a small boy in a red winter jacket with a strip of silver reflective tape across the shoulders. "That's Cal's coat," Delmar said. "Keep watching." The boy came forward into the headlight wash. He had the hood up. He was Cal's size. He was carrying Cal's blue backpack with the frayed loop where Cal chewed it. The camera microphone picked up the door hinge, and then Waylon's voice, easy and warm, the voice of a man who has said the same sentence 12,000 mornings. "Mornin', Cal." And on the tape, clear as a bell in the cold, still air, 10 feet from an open door, Bernice Wenzel bent down to the boy in the red coat and said, "You're Cal today. Go on now." The boy climbed up the steps and turned and went down the aisle, and as he passed the camera, the hood slipped back off his head, and it was not Cal. Delmar's hands began to shake. He was aware of it in a distant, clinical way. He watched his own thumb tremble against the plastic edge of the camera, and he thought, with the part of his mind that was still working, that in 20 years of standing in freezing scale pits, he had never once seen his hands do that. "Play it again," he said. Waylon Frisk played it again, and a third time. On the third pass, Delmar noticed something he had missed, which was that before she said it, Bernice glanced up the road, not at the bus, up the road, toward the highway, the way a person checks a mirror. "Who is that boy?" Delmar said. "Casey Wenzel," said Waylon, "Marv's youngest. He's a year older than your son, and he's small for it. Rides the west route out of Deming Corner most days, or he did." He took the camera back and set it on his knee. "I have him on my bus, wearing your son's coat and answering to your son's name, 11 times. 11. Between September of last year and the end of February. Then it stopped." He tapped the camera. "It stopped 4 days after I filed my report." Delmar sat in the first bench of a school bus in the dark and did the only thing he knew how to do, which was to start writing it down. "Tell me about the report." Waylon Frisk had filed a report on October 4th, the day after, in writing, because that was the kind of man he was. He described what he saw to the transportation supervisor, a man named Galen Stutt, and offered the card and said that somebody ought to call somebody. 9 days later, he was in a meeting with Stutt, a woman from the district office, and a lawyer who did work for several local businesses, and he learned that his personal camera constituted unauthorized recording of minors, and that a family on his route had filed a complaint alleging he had made repeated inappropriate comments to a child. 3 days suspension without pay, a letter in his file. And the Cutbank Road stop quietly reclassified as Guardian Pickup, which meant the bus no longer had to serve it at all. They didn't fire me, he said. They wanted me quiet, not gone. Gone makes noise. He looked out the windshield at the other buses. I've got 14 months to my pension. My wife's on my insurance and she's got a bad hip, so I did what they wanted. I kept my mouth shut and I kept my camera, and I stopped opening that door, and every single Tuesday and Thursday for a year, I have driven past that culvert and thought about a boy in a red coat. Why now? Delmar said. Why me? Why now? Because he changed. Waylon Frisk's voice did something then, and Delmar heard the 15 years in it. Your kid used to talk the whole ride, bugs mostly. Then about February he went quiet, and he started sleeping. 7 years old, 7:20 in the morning, out cold before we hit the highway. Then last week he sat down behind me, and I said something about the frost, and he didn't answer, and when I looked in the mirror he was holding his arm like this. The driver folded his left arm across his chest, hand cupping the inside of his elbow. And I know that hold. My wife's been on dialysis 3 years. That's the hold you got after they take blood. The heater ticked. Out on the lot, somebody's air brakes let go with a bang. I'm not a smart man, said Waylon Frisk, but I've hauled every kind of kid there is, and when a boy who talks stops talking, somebody's doing something to him. So I quit waiting for you to ask. Delmar Ludden sat very still and let the number settle. Then he said, How many cards do you have? From that route, 3 years roughly, some gaps. Would you let me copy them? That's the part where you make your decision slow. Waylon turned in the seat, and his old face was hard. You take those, you can't put it back, and I want to tell you what I think you're going to find, so you can decide with your eyes open. Say it. I've had that house on my mirror for 3 years. He held up 2 fingers. There were 2 little boys out at that place when I started the route. Yours on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And another one, smaller, dark hair, real thin, used to sit on the porch step in the summer, in the mornings, when I went by at 6:50. Never rode. I asked at the barn once. They said he was homebound. Special ed. Homebound instruction. So he don't ride. Delmar waited. I haven't seen that boy since March of 2023, said Waylon Frisk. Not on the porch. Not in the yard. Not at the pond. And I have driven past that house 1,100 times since. Delmar Ludden did not go to the sheriff. Instead, he did the thing he was built for. He started weighing. For 8 days, he changed nothing about his life. He worked his routes. He sealed a livestock scale in Kettleman and did a semi-annual on the county landfill deck. And he ate supper with his wife. And he did not look at her too long. Twice she asked if he'd sorted out the bus thing, and he said the driver was a crank. And both times he watched her shoulders come down an inch. And both times he wrote the date in the back of the calibration book afterward. But under the ordinary hours, he built the first thing every investigation needs, which is a baseline. You cannot know a load is wrong unless you know what right weighs. He started with his son. Delmar took Cal fishing on a Saturday at the pit south of Deming Corner, which was a thing they did, and while they sat on a bucket in the wind, he asked easy questions in no particular order and let them drift. Did he like riding to Grandma's? Sure. Did Casey ever come over there? Sometimes. Was Casey nice? Casey was okay. He got mad if you touched his cards. Then, later, with a bobber sitting still on brown water. Bud, when you go to the doctor with Grandma, where do you go? The big one. Cal held up a hand and turned it. Not the one in town. The one where you go on the highway a long time and there's a fish tank in the wall. Delmar kept his eyes on the water. The one in Waterloo. Yeah. What do they do there? Stickers, said Cal. Then the hat. Then a milkshake. But only if you don't cry. And I don't cry. The hat. The hat with the strings. His son made a cage of his fingers and set it on his own head and made a face and laughed because he was 7. It's got goop. They put goop on your head and then they say lay still and they turn off the lights and you have to look at a spinny light and it's really long. It's so boring, Dad. Delmar's mouth had gone dry. He knew what that was. Everyone who has ever sat in a waiting room knows what that is. It is an electroencephalogram. Wires glued to a child's scalp in a dark room while a strobe runs to see whether a brain is doing something it shouldn't. Buddy, he said, and his voice came out fine, which surprised him. When you go there, What do they call you? Cal reeled in a little, checked his bare hook, and shrugged. Darby, he said. Something in Delmar's chest went cold and flat and level, like a deck with the number finally settled. Why do they call you that? Grandma says it's the game. Cal frowned at the hook, then brightened. It's Darby at the doctor, and Cal at home. If you say the wrong one, you don't get the milkshake. Mom does it too. Mom does it too, Delmar repeated. Mom's the best at it, said his son, and cast badly, and lost the bobber in the weeds. That night, Delmar Ludden sat in his shed until 2 in the morning and did not sleep. And at some point, he took his father's crimping pliers out of the chest and held them in his fist until the knurling left a pattern in his palm, because he had discovered that there was a thing inside him that wanted very badly to drive out to Cutbank Road with a length of pipe, and he had to hold something. He didn't go. He wrote instead. On a legal pad, in the block capitals he used on state forms, he made 3 columns, and he labeled them the way he'd label anything. Claimed, observed, difference. Under claimed he wrote, Cal at school octave 3. Under observed, Casey on bus, 41, 7:41 a.m., wearing Cal's coat and named as Cal. Under difference, he wrote a single question that would organize the next 11 weeks of his life. Where was my son that morning? The school's attendance record for October 3rd of the previous year showed Cal Ludden present, all day, no tardy. Delmar got that from the front office in 90 seconds by asking for his own child's attendance history for a custody form, which was not a lie so much as a load he intended to carry later. The woman who printed it out was named Loretta Euchre, and she had worked that front desk for 22 years, and when she handed it across the counter, she did not let go of it right away. You want 24 too? She said. Should I? I'll tell you something, and then I'm going to go answer that phone, she said. 3 years running I've had a boy in this building on the rolls I have never laid eyes on. Homebound instruction, medical, paperwork comes in beautiful, always on time, always signed. And twice a year the homebound teacher's supposed to lay eyes on him, and twice a year that visit gets moved, and then it happens at the county office instead of at the house, which is not how it works. She slid the printout the rest of the way over. I have written that down every single year. In an email, to 3 different people. Nobody looked. Somebody looked, said Loretta Euchre. That's the part that bothers me. Because every year the paperwork came back cleaner. You don't get cleaner by accident. Somebody's reading my emails and fixing what I flag. She went to answer the phone. The $40 went to a records request at the clinic in Waterloo, where Delmar learned nothing at all about a patient named Darby Wenzel, because he was not that child's parent or guardian, and the law is the law. But the woman at the release of information window, working from the script she had to work from, told him the one thing he actually needed by telling him she couldn't tell him. I can't confirm or deny a record. If you're not on the consent form, I can't even tell you whether that name exists in our system. Delmar drove home 90 miles with both hands on the wheel and one sentence going around in his head like a stone in a dryer. They took his picture. That was the moment it stopped being about a bus. He began working 2 jobs. In the daytime, he tested scales. At night, at the bench in the shed with the door bolted, he built a case the way he built everything, in a spiral notebook with a ruler, and it took him until the first week of December. Waylon Frisk gave him the coffee can on a Sunday morning in the driver's own shop with the space heater going, 41 memory cards with masking tape on them, and the 2 men sat there for 6 hours and copied every card to a laptop while a Bears game they weren't watching played on a shelf television. It took 3 more weekends to go through what mattered. Waylon knew the route by heart and could jump the timeline to the second. Skip ahead, that's the Novak Drive, nothing till the culvert. 11 mornings on which Casey Wenzel boarded bus 41 in Cal's coat and answered to Cal's name. 9 afternoons on which a silver Wenzel Care transport van was parked at Bernice's house, backed in, at a time of day when it should have been on a dialysis run. 22 mornings on which a gray pickup was parked on the far side of the windbreak, mostly Thursdays, visible for about 2 seconds through the gap in the spruce as the bus went by. The plate was never readable. The truck had a toolbox with a dent in the lid and a decal in the back window. And one boy, thin, dark-haired, on a porch step in summer light, 31 separate mornings between June of 2022 and March 14th of 2023, and then never again. March 14th, 2023, was a Tuesday. The card for that day showed the boy on the step at 6:52 a.m. in a t-shirt, holding something orange, maybe a cup. He was the only thing on the frame for about 4 seconds. He did not wave. Waylon Frisk paused it there and looked at it for a while, and then got up and went into the other room and did not come back for 10 minutes. The next card, March 15th, showed no boy on the step and a flatbed truck backed up to the machine shed with a load on it under a blue tarp. He wrote down the date and he drove to the landfill. The Tallis County landfill is a public facility, and its scale house prints a ticket for every load that crosses the deck, and those tickets are public records. Delmar Ludden was the man who certified that scale twice a year. He filled out the request form at the county office like any citizen, paid the copy fee, waited 11 days, and got a stack of tickets for a 2-week window in March of 2023. On March 15, 2023, at 9:12 a.m., a 2004 flatbed, registered to Wenzel Care Transport, crossed the inbound scale at 14,880 pounds and crossed the outbound at 11,700 pounds, disposing of 3,180 pounds of material described on the ticket as mixed conch rubble. On March 22nd, the same truck disposed of 2,940 pounds, same description. Delmar sat in his truck in the county office parking lot with the tickets on the wheel and felt the whole thing tip over into a shape he could finally see. Because concrete rubble does not come out of a place unless concrete went into a place. And a man who has spent his life on the difference between what a ticket says and what is actually there had exactly one question left, and it was a question of volume. He went to the ready-mix plant on the highway the next morning with a story about doing a scale check, which was half true because he did their scale. And while he was there, he asked the dispatcher whether they could pull an old delivery for him. Farm business, he said. Trying to settle up a bill from a couple years back. The dispatcher was 24 and bored and thought looking up a 2023 ticket was a fun break from her morning. Bernice Wenzel, Cutbank Road, March 20th, 2023. 5.5 cubic yards of 4,000 psi mix, delivered, 1 truck, morning pour. Delmar thanked her and walked out to his pickup and sat down and did the arithmetic on the back of the ticket with a carpenter's pencil, and his hand was steady this time. He had been in that machine shed 100 times. He had helped Marv change a tire in it. He knew that building the way you know buildings you've been bored in, 30 feet by 40, a 14-foot slider on the east end, an oil-stained dirt floor with a low spot by the door where the water came in every spring. 30 by 40 is 1,200 square feet. A 4-inch slab over 1,200 square feet is 400 cubic feet, which is 14 and 8/10 cubic yards. They'd bought 5.5. They hadn't poured the shed. 5.5 yards doesn't touch a shed floor. 5.5 yards, at 4 inches, covers about 440 square feet, 20 by 22. A pad, a patch, a single bay in the corner of a dirt-floored building, poured in one morning in March by a family that had never poured anything in that shed in 35 years. And the rubble, 6,120 pounds of broken concrete, hauled to the landfill in 2 loads on the 15th and the 22nd, before and after the pour on the 20th, which meant something had been broken out first, which meant there had already been a slab in that corner, and they had taken it up, and then they had put a new one down 5 days later. Delmar Ludden sat in a parking lot in December with a ready-mix ticket in his hand and understood, in the plain arithmetic of his trade, that in the 3rd week of March 2023, his wife's family had opened a floor and closed it again, in the same week that a thin, dark-haired boy stopped sitting on the porch step. He drove home. He put the truck in the shed. He walked out into the field behind the house in the dark and stood in the frozen stubble for a long time, and then he came inside and washed his hands for a while, and then he went upstairs and looked at his son sleeping with one arm thrown over the dog, and he made 3 decisions that night that never changed. The first was that he would not say one word to anyone in that family, ever, about what he knew, until the day it would cost them everything at once. The second was that Cal would never be alone with any of them again, and that this would be accomplished so gradually that nobody would notice it happening. The third was the hardest, and he made it standing in the doorway of his own bedroom looking at his wife asleep in the bed they had shared for 11 years, with her phone face down on the nightstand, charging. He decided he was going to find out exactly what she was, before he decided what to do about it. The gray pickup with the dented toolbox belonged to a man named Blaine Tesh, and it took Delmar 9 minutes to learn that, because Blaine Tesh had a magnetic door sign and a website with his photograph on it. Tesh Benefit Advocates. Disability claims, appeals, representative payee services, kinship care and adoption subsidy consulting. The bio said he had spent 11 years as a disability determination examiner for the state before going into private practice to help families navigate a system that too often says no. Tesh Benefit Advocates, serving families of eastern Iowa since 2014. Disability claims, appeals, representative payee services, kinship care, and adoption subsidy consulting. We speak the language so you don't have to. The photograph showed a trim man in his late 40s in a quarter zip with his arms crossed, standing in front of a courthouse he almost certainly did not work in. The bio said he had spent 11 years as a disability determination examiner for the state before going into private practice to help families navigate a system that too often says no. A disability determination examiner is the person who decides. When a claim comes in for a child with seizures, a child who cannot be left alone, a child whose file is thick with specialist visits, a state examiner reads the medical evidence and makes the call, and the money starts. 11 years of deciding, then 12 years of representing the people whose files he used to decide. Delmar drove past Bernice Wenzel's place at 7:40 on a Thursday evening, with his lights off for the last 300 yards, which was a thing he had never done in his life, and the gray pickup was parked in the shadow of the windbreak, and it was still there at 11:15. Marlise's car pulled in at 7:50. She had told him she was doing books for Marv until 9. It went on like that for 3 Thursdays. Tesh's truck, his wife's car, and twice a month a silver care transport van in the yard too, which meant it wasn't only a romance, it was a meeting. Marlise's car pulled in at 7:50. She had told him she was doing books for Marv until 9. Marlise had 2 email accounts on the family laptop, and the second one auto-filled its password because she had told the browser to remember it in 2019 and had forgotten she'd ever done that. Delmar did not read her mail like a jealous man. He read it like an auditor. He searched for dates. He searched for the 3rd of October. He searched for March 14th and 15th of 2023. What came back was not love letters. There were a few of those, from years back, embarrassing in the way that all of them are. But the bulk of it was logistics, and the logistics were so much worse. The word they used was appointments. Who was taking which appointment? Whether the school would need a note. Whether the review was in person this cycle or paper. In April of 2024, I can't do it Thursday. D has the thing at the elementary, and if I'm not there, Loretta will start emailing again. D, not Darby, never Darby, in writing. D, and one message, from Blaine Tesh, sent in January of 2024, that Delmar printed and put in a plastic sleeve and read maybe 400 times over the following months. Stop asking me that. What's done is done, and asking about it in writing is how people go to prison. The file is clean. The file has been clean for 10 months. All it needs is a body in a chair twice a year and a schedule of care. You have 2 boys. Use the small one. Delmar Ludden read "Use the small one" about his son, sitting at his own kitchen table at 1 in the morning, and did not break anything, and did not weep, and did not call anyone. He got up and made coffee and sat back down and opened his notebook to a clean page and wrote at the top, in block capitals, "What does it weigh? Who is Darby Wenzel? Where is the money? Who else knows?" The first question broke open in the county recorder's office in the 2nd week of January, and it broke because of a date. Darby Wenzel's birth certificate, a public index record he could request as a matter of course, listed a date of birth of September 9, 2017, at a hospital in Black Hawk County, and it listed the mother as Renee Ann Wenzel. Renee Wenzel had died on the ice on a county road in February of 2016. Delmar sat in the recorder's office with a photocopy in his hands and did the only arithmetic that mattered. A woman who had been dead 19 months had, according to the state of Iowa, given birth to a son. That was not a clerical error. Nobody makes that error. That is a document somebody made on purpose. And the reason to make it is that a dead mother cannot be interviewed, cannot be found, cannot fail a drug test, and cannot ever change her story. And a child whose mother is dead is a child eligible for things. Survivor benefits on the mother's record. Kinship care through a grandmother. A whole file built on a person who cannot be asked a single question. He thought about the hospital in Black Hawk County, and the timing, September of 2017, and he sat down on the bench in the hallway and did the last piece of arithmetic he ever wanted to do in his life. Marlies had left him in January of 2017. She had come back in December. She had told him she'd spent those months at her mother's, sleeping in her childhood bedroom, working part-time at a nursery, thinking. She had come back thinner and quieter, and she had cried in the kitchen and said she'd had a bad year, and he had believed every word of it because he loved her and because it was true, just not the way she meant it. Delmar Ludden sat on a hallway bench in the Tallis County Courthouse and understood that his wife had had a child in September of 2017, and that she had handed that child to her mother, and that her mother had registered him as the son of a dead woman so the state would pay for him, and that the boy had lived 6 years on a porch step in a house at the end of Cutbank Road under a name that belonged to a lie, and that on March 14, 2023, something had happened to him, and that on March 20, they had poured a floor. He went out to his truck and did not drive for 20 minutes. When he could, he drove to the elementary school and parked across the street and waited for recess and watched his son run around a blacktop in a red coat with silver tape on the shoulders. Then he went home and made supper, and when Marlies came in at 6:30 and took her phone out before her coat, he said, "How was your day?" in a completely ordinary voice. She said it was fine. He said good, and turned the burner down, and that was the night Delmar Ludden stopped being a man with a problem and became something else. The second question, where is the money, took him until February, and he did it the way a scale man does anything, which is that he refused to guess. He could not see the family's bank records and was never going to try. What he could see was public, and there was more of it than most people imagine. Verla Wenzel was a notary, and in Iowa, a notary journal is a record. Marv's company held a Medicaid transportation provider number, and provider numbers appear in public enrollment lists. Bernice had filed for an agricultural exemption on the machine shed in 2021. Blaine Tesch's business was registered to a mailbox store in Waterloo. The shape was this: a child with a manufactured identity and a manufactured medical file generated 4 streams at once: a monthly survivor benefit on a dead woman's earnings record, a disability payment that required a documented, ongoing, serious condition, hence the appointments, hence the hat with the wires, a kinship care stipend paid to a grandmother raising an orphaned relative, and Marv billing a Medicaid transportation program for round trips to Waterloo, 90 miles each way, at a rate per loaded mile, for a passenger who mostly did not exist except on the days they borrowed a body. Delmar sat with a calculator and built the low estimate, because in his trade, you never claim the high number, and the low estimate came to somewhere between $48,000 and $60,000 a year. He wrote the figure in the notebook and looked at it and thought, that's a used combine. That's what he cost. That's the load. The third question, who else knows, answered itself on a Tuesday in late February, in the parking lot of a grocery store in Yarrow Bend, when a 16-year-old girl knocked on his truck window with her knuckle and said, "You're Cal's dad, right? Can I get in? It's cold." Dinah Wenzel was Verla's daughter, and she had her mother's jaw and none of her mother's stillness. She got in and sat with her backpack in her lap and her hood up, and she looked straight out the windshield at a shopping cart corral for a while before she said anything. "You've been asking people things," she said. Delmar's whole body went to alert, and he made himself hold the wheel loosely. "Who says?" "Nobody says. That's how I know." She pulled at a thread on her backpack strap. "Grandma's been weird since Christmas. Uncle Marv came over at like 11 at night twice. My mom keeps saying it's handled on the phone in the laundry room, and my mom only goes in the laundry room when it's about Darby." "You knew him," Delmar said. "I babysat him." Dinah Wenzel's chin went hard and stayed hard. "Like 100 times. He was little. He didn't talk much, but he'd talk to me. He liked orange soda, and he was scared of the dog, and he could do that thing where you snap with 2 fingers. He practiced it all one summer." She turned and looked at Delmar for the first time. "He's not at a special school in Missouri." "Is that what they told you?" "That's what they told everybody." March of 8th grade. He needed more help than Grandma could give him, and there was a place, and they were sad about it, and Mom cried, And then nobody was allowed to say his name in the house because it upset Grandma. She wiped her nose with the back of her wrist, furious. I was 13. I believed it for like 8 months. Then I asked my mom what town it was in, and she got mad at me. Not sad, mad. And I've been not believing it for 2.5 years, and there is nobody I can say that to. Dinah, do you have anything? Pictures, messages, anything with a date on it? I have everything, said Dinah Wenzel. I'm the one who takes the pictures at Christmas. I have 4 years of a shared photo album that nobody remembers I'm in, and I have a box in my closet with his cup in it, and a drawing he did, and I have a video from March 11th, 2023. The truck was very quiet. What's on it? Delmar said. Him, she said, on the porch. He's doing the snap. He finally got it, both fingers, and he's laughing. Her voice broke right down the middle, and she put her fist against her mouth and got it back. It's 11 seconds. It's 3 days before. I'm going to need you to not do anything, he said. Not one thing. Don't confront your mom. Don't tell your friends. Don't post it. Keep going to school and be exactly who you were last week. Why? Because right now, they think this is a bus driver with a grudge, he said. The day they think it's more than that. The file gets clean, and everything you and I have gets thrown in a burn barrel out behind that shed. I've been standing on this for 4 months doing nothing, so they'd stay comfortable. He looked at her. Can you do the hardest thing there is and act normal a little longer? Dinah Wenzel wiped her face with both hands and sat up straight. I've been acting normal for 2.5 years, she said. I'm real good at it. The state of Iowa has an office most people have never heard of, called the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, and it lives inside the Attorney General's office, and it does 2 things. It investigates providers who steal from Medicaid, and it investigates the abuse and neglect of people in care. Delmar Ludden found that out on a Thursday night, and on Friday morning he called and asked to speak to an investigator, and a woman named Doreen Ivers called him back at 4 in the afternoon, and he talked for 9 minutes without once raising his voice. She let him finish. Then she said, Mr. Ludden, can I ask what you do for a living? I certify scales for the Department of Agriculture. There was a pause on the line, and then something in Doreen Ivers's voice changed, and she said, say the concrete part again, slower. He said it again, slower. Volume delivered, area covered, rubble hauled out on the 15th and the 22nd, pour on the 20th. Ready mix ticket. 2 landfill tickets from a scale he had personally certified in April of that year and had a signed report on. A dead mother on a birth certificate. 11 mornings of a boy in another boy's coat. 31 mornings of a child on a porch, and then 1,100 mornings of no child at all. How much of this can you put in my hand as a document? Doreen Ivers said. All of it. When can you be in Des Moines? He drove down on a Monday with a banker's box, and he was in a conference room for 5 hours. And at the end of it, Doreen Ivers sat back and looked at the box and then at him and said the sentence that made him understand it was real. I need to bring in the county attorney and the DCI, she said. And I need you to understand what happens next, because it's going to feel like nothing is happening. Delmar went to work. He tested a hopper scale at the co-op with Ivan Deming leaning in the doorway complaining about his knees. He sealed a truck scale at a gravel pit and wrote it up and drove home. He took Cal to a birthday party at a bowling alley and stood against the wall with the other fathers. He rebuilt the culvert on his own driveway on a Saturday because his hands needed a job. He did it slowly, the way you'd back a load down a hill. In January, he told Marlies his winter schedule had shifted, and Tuesdays and Thursdays were his light days now, so he'd pick Cal up. In February, he signed Cal up for a Thursday robotics club that ran until 5:30, and made it a big, exciting thing at supper, so the boy would defend it himself. In March, he took 2 weeks of vacation he'd been sitting on for 4 years, and said he was going to finish the basement. By the last week of March, his son had not been alone with any member of the Wenzel family in 81 days, and nobody had said a word about it, because none of it had been a refusal. It had all been a schedule. She came to the house on a Saturday in the first week of April with a coffee cake, which was a thing she did perhaps twice a year, and she sat at Delmar's kitchen table and asked after his mother and talked about the church roof, and then she said, "We haven't had our boy out to the place in a while." "Busy stretch," Delmar said. He was at the sink with his back to her, which he had planned. Robotics. Robotics, said Bernice Wenzel, in a voice with a smile in it and nothing behind the smile. Well, he's got 2 grandmothers, and one of them's dead, so I'd hate to be a stranger. Delmar dried his hands and turned around and looked at the woman who had bent down to a boy in a red coat and told him whose name to use, and he made his face do the thing his face had been doing for 5 months. Come out for his birthday, he said. May 10th. We'll do the whole thing. Doreen Ivers called on April 11th. The county attorney's on board, she said. Selma Krebs. She's good and she's careful. And she's already told me the thing you're not going to want to hear, so I'll say it now. The concrete math is beautiful, but it's an inference. A judge signs a warrant to dig up a man's floor on probable cause, not on arithmetic. I need to pair it with something a jury doesn't have to think about. Which is what? Which is them, on the record, producing a child who isn't the child, said Doreen Ivers. Fraud we can hold in our hands, then the floor. Delmar Ludden stood in his shed and looked at the wall where his father's seals hung on a nail. 60 little discs of soft lead on a wire, each one crimped with a die that had a number on it that belonged to one man and no other. When's the next one? He said. The next what? The next time they have to produce him. You said twice a year. School has a homebound review and the state has a redetermination. When? There's a continuing disability review scheduled, said Doreen Ivers slowly. In-person consultative exam. Pediatric neurology, Waterloo, May 6th. 4 days before my son's birthday, Delmar said. Mr. Ludden, they'll need a body and a chair, he said, and he heard his own voice come out flat and level, and he thought about a message in a plastic sleeve and used the small one. So let's make sure the body they bring isn't mine. The plan they built over the last 2 weeks of April had 4 parts, and Delmar Ludden argued for exactly one of them, and it was the part nobody else had thought of. Part 1 was the exam. On May 6th, Darby Wenzel had a consultative examination at a pediatric neurology clinic in Waterloo, ordered by the state as part of a continuing disability review. Somebody would have to bring a child. Doreen Ivers arranged for 2 agents and a fraud investigator to be in that clinic, with the registration photographs from the previous 4 visits already pulled and printed, and a clinic administrator who had turned the color of paper when she understood what she'd been billing. Part 2 was the school. Loretta Euchre, who had been writing her flagging emails into the void for 3 years, was asked for those emails and produced them in 11 minutes, forwarded from a folder she had labeled, with terrible clarity, Keep. Part 3 was Dinah. Selma Krebs met her with her school counselor and a victim advocate in a room with the door open, and Dinah Wenzel handed over a shoebox with a plastic cup and a crayon drawing in it, and a phone with 11 seconds of video on it of a small boy on a porch step learning to snap his fingers, dated March 11th, 2023. Part 4 was the floor, and Part 4 was Delmar's. You'll want to dig on the 6th, he said, in a conference room, to 5 people with more authority than he'd ever had in his life. While they're in Waterloo. That's right. But you're going to go in there with a warrant and a backhoe, and you're going to be looking for a place to start, and you're going to be looking at 1,200 square feet of building, and the ground saturated in May. We have ground-penetrating radar, said one of the DCI men. I know you do. It'll take you a day and a half in that shed, because it's full of a 35-year-old man's junk and there's rebar in half the yard. Delmar put a sheet of paper on the table. He'd drawn it with a straight edge, to scale, in pencil, the way his father drew things. You don't need a day and a half. 5.5 yards at 4 inches covers 440 square feet. The only place in that building with a clear span that size, and a slider wide enough to back a mixer chute to, is the northeast bay. Start there. And bring a saw, not a hammer. You're going to want to keep the edge intact, because the cold joint will show you the day they poured, and that ties it to the ticket. On the morning of May 6th, Delmar Ludden did something he had not done in 19 years of marriage, which was to lie to his wife directly. He told her he had a 2-day certification job in Sioux City. He kissed her at the door. He put Cal in the truck at 6:30 with a duffel bag and a fishing rod and drove 90 minutes east to his sister's place in the country and sat on her porch steps watching Cal chase chickens around the yard, and at 7:50 his phone buzzed. It was Dinah Wenzel. 3 words. Casey has a haircut. Delmar closed his eyes. At 9:41 a.m. in a pediatric neurology clinic in Waterloo, Bernice Wenzel and Marv Wenzel checked in an 8-year-old boy named Casey for an appointment scheduled under the name Darby Wenzel. Bernice presented a Medicaid card and a state letter. Marv had parked a Wenzel Care transport van in the loading zone with the hazards on because he was going to bill the round trip. Then a woman in a cardigan who had been sitting in the waiting room reading a magazine for 40 minutes stood up and said, "Mrs. Wenzel, my name's Doreen Ivers. I'm an investigator with the Iowa Attorney General's office. Would you come with me, please?" At 9:44 a.m., 41 miles southwest, on a gravel road at the end of Cutbank, a caravan of 6 vehicles turned in past a washed-out culvert. They cut the northeast corner of the machine shed floor at 11:20 in the morning with a concrete saw along a cold joint that was exactly where a man with a carpenter's pencil had said it would be. And by 2 o'clock that afternoon, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation had recovered the remains of a small child wrapped in a moving blanket beneath 4 inches of concrete and 18 inches of fill. The medical examiner would need 3 weeks to be certain of anything, but there was a t-shirt, faded orange, and there was a plastic cup in a shoebox in a 16-year-old girl's closet with the same cartoon on it, and there was an 11-second video of a boy on a porch step, laughing 3 days before. Delmar Ludden was on a porch 2 counties away, watching his son try to pick up a chicken, when Selma Krebs called him at 2:19 p.m. and said only, "We found him." Cal came running over with grass in his hair and said, "Dad, are you okay?" "Yeah, bud," said Delmar. "I'm okay. Come here a second." He put his arms around his son and held onto him a great deal harder than the moment required, and over the boy's shoulder he looked out at a yard in the sunshine and thought about a 5-year-old who had spent 6 years being a number on a form, and who had learned to snap his fingers with 2 fingers, and who had practiced it all one summer. Marlise Ludden was arrested at the county extension office at 3:50 that afternoon. She called Delmar from the jail at 7, and he took the call, which surprised everyone, including him. He had prepared for this, the way he prepared for everything, and what he had prepared was a single question. She started fast. She said it was insane, that it was her mother, that she'd had no idea what her mother had done, that she'd been trapped, that she'd been 18 kinds of stupid a long time ago, but that she had never, not once. "Marlise," he said. She stopped. "Just tell me one thing and I'll let you talk as long as you want." He was sitting in the shed on his father's stool with the notebook closed on the bench in front of him. The bus driver, Waylon Frisk, when they wrote him up and put a letter in his file for making inappropriate comments to a child. Who made that complaint? The silence on the line went on for a long, long time. "Blaine wrote it," she said finally. "I signed it." "You signed it." He was going to keep asking questions, Del. He was going to keep. "You signed a paper that said a 60-year-old man said filthy things to a child," said Delmar Ludden, "so that nobody would ask why my son was riding a bus under a dead woman's son's name." "I want to see Cal," she said. "No," he said, and hung up, and sat in the shed until the yard light came on. The charges came down over the following 9 weeks, and they came down like weather. Bernice Wenzel was charged with first-degree theft, ongoing criminal conduct, forgery, identity theft, child endangerment resulting in death, and abuse of a corpse. The state's theory, built from a decade of paper and 1 autopsy, was that on March 14, 2023, Darby Wenzel, a 5-year-old with a documented real seizure disorder that had been, monstrously, the one true thing at the center of a false file, had a seizure in a bathtub on Cutbank Road while his grandmother was on the phone in the kitchen, and that he died there, and that no one called 911 because a 911 call ends with a death certificate, and a death certificate ends 4 streams of money at once. Marv Wenzel was charged with the same conduct plus Medicaid provider fraud for 119 transportation claims, and separately for the flatbed, the saw, the rubble, and the pour. Blaine Tesh was charged federally as well as by the state because his fingerprints were on the architecture, the 2018 appeal that reversed the initial denial, the schedule of care template, the 4 continuing disability reviews he had personally prepared and submitted, and 11 years of knowing exactly which boxes a file has to check to never be looked at twice. The government put his own emails in front of a jury, including the one telling the mother of the dead child to use the small one, and his attorney's argument that this referred to a vehicle did not survive the afternoon. Marlies pleaded. She pleaded to ongoing criminal conduct, to child endangerment, and to filing a false report in exchange for testifying, and she got 18 years. She read a statement in court about grief and fear that lasted 4 minutes, and the judge, a patient woman near retirement, let her finish and then said one sentence before she imposed sentence. Ms. Ludden, in 6 years, not one adult in this family made a phone call that any stranger on the street would have made in 10 seconds. Waylon Frisk testified on the second day of Bernice Wenzel's trial. He was 61 by then, and he wore a jacket he'd bought for a funeral. He explained what a pre-trip inspection is. He explained that he had bought a dashcam in 2016 with his own money after a man in a Buick ran his stop arm. He explained the coffee can and the masking tape, and the courtroom laughed, and the judge let them. Then the prosecutor played 11 seconds of video on a screen the size of a door. Fog, a yellow reflection, a gravel drive, a small boy in a red coat with silver tape across the shoulders, and an old woman's voice, 10 feet from an open door on a still cold morning, saying, "You're Cal today. Go on now." The district that had suspended Waylon Frisk settled with him in November. He got the pay, the letter came out of his file, and Galen Stutt resigned in advance of a hearing he did not want to have. Waylon told Delmar over coffee that he'd asked them for one other thing, and they'd said yes. A new stop on Cutbank Road, 300 yards up from the culvert, at the end of a driveway that belongs to nobody in that family. "It's not for anybody," he said. "There's no kid there. I just wanted the stop back on the sheet." Delmar Ludden bought a plot in the Lutheran cemetery north of Yarrow Bend in the spring, and there was an argument about the name on the stone, which he won. The state had records under Darby Wenzel. The birth certificate naming a dead woman as his mother had been voided by court order. The truth, established by DNA in a lab in Ankeny, was that the child buried under a machine shed floor for 3 years and 2 months was the son of Marlies Ludden and Blaine Tesh, born September 9, 2017, and never once registered as anybody's son who was alive to claim him. The stone says, Darby 2017, 2023. He learned to snap his fingers, and he was somebody's Cal. Ludden turned 8, and then 9. He rides bus 41 every day, both directions, to a farmhouse 4 miles outside of town where his father is usually already home. He went to therapy for a year and a half and complained about it constantly and then, one day, stopped complaining. He knows he had a brother. He was told the truth in the smallest true pieces anybody could cut it into, over about 2 years, by a man who believes the only thing worse than a hard number is a number somebody softened for you. In August, Delmar Ludden drove out to the co-op at Kettleman to do a semi-annual on the Hopper scale, and Ivan Deming brought 2 cups of coffee out to the pit and stood there complaining about his knees while Delmar set his test weights. Then he stood on the empty deck with his hands in his pockets for a full minute, watching the zero, waiting for the number to stop moving, the way his father taught him. Behind him, out past the driveway, bus 41 went by on the county road with its lights on, and it slowed, and it stopped at a driveway that belongs to nobody, and the stop arm came out into the morning air, and after a moment it folded back in, and the bus went on. When the number was still, Delmar Ludden climbed down into the pit, made his adjustment, wrote it in the book, and crimped a soft lead seal onto the wire with his father's pliers. The seal doesn't say a thing is right. That's what his father always told him. All the seal says is that nobody's touched it since I said it was. It's Nathan again. Give me 2 minutes, because I can't leave this one where it ended. The thing I keep turning over is that nobody in this story got caught by rage. Delmar Ludden had every reason on earth to drive out to that house the night he saw that tape. And if he had, here's what would have happened. A scene, a restraining order, a very sympathetic grandmother crying to a deputy about her son-in-law, and a week later, a burn barrel behind that machine shed, and a floor nobody ever looked at again. The loud version of that night ends with a little boy staying lost forever. The quiet version ends with a concrete saw and a headstone with his name on it. That's not a comfortable lesson, because rage feels like loyalty. It feels like the thing love is supposed to do. But look at what actually rescued that child's name. Attendance records, a ready-mix ticket, 2 landfill weights, a secretary's email folder called Keep, a 16-year-old who kept a plastic cup in a shoebox, An old man with a coffee can full of memory cards who got punished for telling the truth once and told it again anyway. And here's the part I want you to take with you. Every system that hands out money has to be fed proof, and proof can be manufactured. But proof leaves weight. It leaves volume, mileage, timestamps, a truck crossing a scale on a Wednesday morning. Somebody built a whole child out of paper, and the thing that finally broke it was not a confession. It was the fact that 5.5 yards of concrete only covers 440 square feet, and a man who knew that couldn't unknow it. If you're in a situation right now where somebody keeps telling you that you're imagining things, write it down, date it, keep the boring records. You don't need to prove anything today. You just need the number to still be there when you finally decide to look at it. Zero it empty. Then weigh. I'm Nathan. Thanks for being here. If this one got you, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.